It was the week of the school's anniversary, and while everyone was setting up balloons, banners, and parade floats, I couldn't stop thinking about something else entirely. That year, instead of the parade and competitions, I wanted to do something no one had ever dared to do: go down beneath the chapel. We had always been told that place was off limits, that the chapel was sacred, that underneath it there was only dirt and concrete, that you were better off not snooping around because you call things you don't understand. But ever since first year of high school, the same story had been going around. Before it was a school, that land had been a convent. And underneath the chapel, they said, the nuns kept their secrets. It wasn't just classroom gossip. Even the older teachers avoided talking about it. When someone brought up the old convent, they'd change the subject or say, those are just stories, with a face that did nothing to put you at ease. That anniversary week, the atmosphere was different. There was music in the courtyard, students running back and forth, teachers distracted and busy organizing events. It was the first time in a long while that it felt like no one was watching us too closely. That's when one of my friends had the idea. "This is the week," he said. "If we're going to do it, it has to be now." There were 4 of us: me, Martine, who was always cracking jokes, Diego, the serious one, and Carla, who was technically the sensible one of the group. But that day, she was the first to say yes. The plan was simple. While everyone was in the main courtyard watching the band and dance performances, we would volunteer to help move things inside the chapel. Nobody would suspect anything. Nobody would come up to check on us. The plan didn't fail. The school chapel had always made me uneasy. It was beautiful, sure, stained glass, wooden pews, a smell of old flowers, but it also had a heaviness to it, like the air inside got stuck and couldn't get out. That afternoon, it was almost empty. Only one of the sisters was there, arranging candles near the altar. "Sister, can we help with anything?" Carla asked in that warm voice she used whenever she wanted to win over a teacher. The nun looked at us, hesitated for a second, then said, "You can arrange the pews at the back, children, for tomorrow's Mass. But be quick. You should get back to the courtyard." We split up the task. Moving pews was the last thing on our minds. What we were looking for was somewhere else. I pretended to be distracted and started drifting toward the main altar. From the outside, you never get close to it. You always stay in the pews, far away. I climbed the marble steps. I could feel the sister's eyes on the back of my neck, but she didn't say anything. Behind the altar, there was a heavy curtain, deep wine red, that fell all the way to the floor. I'd always assumed there was nothing but a wall behind it. That day, I saw something else. The curtain didn't quite reach the floor. It left visible, barely, a dark line along the bottom, like the edge of something. I crouched down, pretending to tie my shoelace, and lifted the fabric slightly. There it was, a trapdoor. It was an old wooden panel with a rusted metal ring handle, no padlock. My heart started beating faster. "Hey," Diego whispered, appearing behind me. "Did you find it?" I nodded without speaking. The sister was still at the back, turned away, arranging something. It was now or never. I signaled to Martine and Carla. The 4 of us grouped behind the altar, pretending to look through some boxes. Carefully, I lifted the trapdoor. Cold, heavy air rose from below. It wasn't just dampness. It smelled of sealed space, old cloth, ancient church, and something else, something sour, like when you open a place that hasn't had ventilation in years. Below, you could see a narrow opening with uneven concrete steps going down. No light. "I'll go first," I said, before anyone could beat me to it. I don't know if I said it out of bravery or pride. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and put one leg in. The step creaked under my weight. "If someone comes, close the trapdoor," Martine whispered. "We'll warn you by knocking." Great joke, I thought. Great joke. But I was already going down. The space was so narrow I had to move sideways, pressed against the cold wall. The phone light barely lit a few steps ahead. The air grew thicker with every meter. With each breath, I tasted something metallic in my mouth. After a few steps, I could no longer stand upright. The ceiling dropped lower. I had to crouch, until I had no choice but to move on all fours. The floor changed from concrete to damp earth. My hands got dirty instantly. The silence down there was very strange. Not the normal silence of an empty place. It was a silence that seemed to be listening. Every time I moved a knee, the sound of my clothes, of my own breathing, bounced around that narrow tunnel like it was too much noise for the space. I moved a few meters more. The flashlight drew patches of light on unfinished stone walls covered in dark moisture stains. And then the light hit something that made me stop dead. At first, I thought it was trash, jars, bottles, old cans. But no, they weren't cans. They were jars. There were dozens of old glass jars, the thick kind, with rusted metal lids. They were stacked against the wall, piled on top of each other in unsteady towers. Some were coated in dust and cobwebs. Others, despite the years, were still hermetically sealed. My flashlight lit up the inside of one. I felt my stomach turn over. Inside the jar, something was floating in a yellowish liquid. It wasn't a piece of cloth or a plant or food scraps. It was something small, human-shaped, tiny fingers, a miniature torso, a head the size of a tennis ball, hairless, pressed against the glass. A fetus. I pulled the light away sharply, as if that would erase what I had seen. But everywhere I pointed, there were more jars, more small shapes, some almost dissolved, others with clearly visible features, tiny noses, closed eyes, hands folded together. I felt dizzy. I had to press one hand against the wall to keep from falling. Next to the jars was a pile of old crucifixes, some broken, others with the figure of Christ worn down, bent, twisted as if they had been yanked off some wall in a rage. Beyond that there were books, prayer books, missals, notebooks, with cracked leather covers. The pages were yellow, stuck together, but on some of them you could still make out words: guilt, sin, penance. And in one corner, almost hidden under a pile of junk, was the thing that chilled me most: a nun's habit. It was just a black piece of cloth, crumpled, but recognizable. The white collar was stained. The fabric had tears in it, as if someone had pulled at it violently. Everything together looked like a dump for sacred things, and things that should never have existed. I stayed there, crouched in that small space, feeling like I was running out of air. In that moment, I thought about the chapel full of flowers, the nuns walking slowly, the school masses, the Easter processions, and about what was buried below, hidden right beneath our feet. And then the silence broke. It was a dry, short sound, like when a glass jar shifts and knocks against another. Crack. I went completely still. "Who's there?" I wanted to whisper, but my voice wouldn't come out. The flashlight trembled in my hand. Crack. Crack. Another jar. It didn't sound like a collapse or a heavy impact. It was like someone, using 2 fingers, was slowly pushing one of the containers. I had the impression that something inside one of those jars had moved a millimeter. A reflection, a flicker in the liquid. I tried to convince myself it was the flashlight, that I had brushed against one without realizing. But I hadn't moved. The air turned colder, as if a draft had suddenly come through from nowhere. I felt something at the back of my neck, not a touch, not a breath, but the sensation that someone was standing right behind me, watching what I was seeing. My mind started filling with questions I didn't want to answer. Whose were those fetuses? Who had put them there? Why were they hidden under a school chapel? Was this something old from the original convent, or something more recent? I didn't want to know any more. I didn't wait for another sound. I didn't even try to look around properly. I turned around as best I could in that narrow space, scraping my knees and elbows against the wall, and started crawling backward, keeping the flashlight pointed forward the whole time, afraid of what might follow me. Every time I moved a hand, I felt dust, cobwebs, pieces of wood. I had the feeling that at any moment I was going to touch one of those cold glass jars. At some point, the flashlight hit one of them directly. For a second, I saw another tiny face, like a badly made doll, mouth slightly open. I had to clench my teeth to keep from screaming right there. I kept moving, almost dragging myself, feeling like the tunnel would never end. Finally, I saw light above me. The trapdoor, the red curtain, someone's feet. "Hurry up," Martine's voice whispered from above. The sister went to the courtyard, but she could come back. With one last effort, I pushed myself up and out. I felt hands on my arms, pulling me, helping me through. I fell backward onto the cold floor of the chapel. The light inside felt blinding after being down there. The trapdoor slammed shut. The curtain fell back into place, as if nothing had happened. "So?" Carla asked, eyes wide. "What's down there?" I stayed there for a while, unable to speak. My mouth was dry. My heart was in my throat. My whole body was shaking. "Nothing," I finally managed, my voice rough. "There's nothing. Just old storage." Diego stared at me hard. He knew I was lying. He saw it on my face. "You sure?" he pressed. "Sure," I repeated. "It's not worth going in." At that moment, we heard the chapel door. The sister was coming back. All 4 of us jumped up and started moving pews, like that had been our only mission from the start. The nun thanked us, told us we could go back to the courtyard, said not to miss the end of the games. We walked out into the sunlight. The music, the laughter, the shouting students made everything feel normal for a moment. But while everyone ran towards the food stands, I looked back at the chapel one last time. I thought about the jars, about the broken crucifixes, about the torn habit, and about that dry sound of glass moving on its own. We never talked about it again, not even among ourselves. If someone brought up the legend of the convent, I'd change the subject. If a teacher said, "There's nothing under the chapel but dirt," I'd quietly clench my fists. Sometimes during Mass, when they made all of us go up to the front, I'd stand there staring at the floor of the altar, thinking about what was underneath, about what they had hidden there. And on the nights when I remembered that place, I didn't only think about the jars. I thought about something else. If that was how they buried their guilt, their mistakes, their sins, what else had they done in that convent? How many stories had they buried alongside those jars? Years later, far from that school, I dreamed about that tunnel again. I dreamed I was going back down with a weak flashlight, and that this time I wasn't alone. Behind me, I could hear soft footsteps, like shoes dragging, and a rosary knocking against heavy cloth. The beads clicked one by one, knocking against each other. When in the dream I turned around to see who was coming, I couldn't make out the face, only the hem of a black habit and bony hands holding a jar against their chest, as if it were a baby. I'd wake up with the feeling that someone was still praying very quietly beneath the chapel. And even though I never went back to that school, something inside me tells me those jars are still there, that the space under the altar is not empty, that they are not just old things, that there are sins that were never properly buried, and that the ghosts of that place do not rest. They won't rest as long as someone keeps saying under their breath that they're just legends, when I know exactly what I saw